What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Cards. Today, a little bit of a Q&A episode. Kind of the first one doing this. I just want to touch on some questions I've received through DMs, private messages, whatever, that maybe will help the mass majority of you that are into wrestling cards, collectibles, whatever. Also want to comment on a few social media posts I've seen through people I follow, newsworthy stuff in the hobby, whatever. Just a few things I want to touch on. So let's get into it. Question comes from Drakes_sports_PC on Instagram. Great dude, reached out to me with some wrestling questions to go back and forth about some wrestling. Also, one of the rare fellow owners of the 2013 PMG Hulk Hogan, which I've talked about in previous video. You can go check that out there. But fist bump, brother, for owning that card. But let's get into his question. So his initial question was kind of the approach to wrestling cards, and then I came back with, well, do you want to buy stuff to hold for the long term? Are you more of a collector? Do you like certain personal favorites of wrestling? What do you want to go about this? And this was his response. I guess I'd be a little bit of both. I rarely sell anything, but just like if it was buying a stock, I don't want to buy it and then it lose half its value. Take the Cardinal Rocky Maivia, for example, in this BGS 9.5. If I bought it today, 2K, would I regret paying that much for it a year from now? Or is the ceiling for the card much higher than the floor? There's obviously been huge growth in cards overall this year, with cards setting record highs, but then retreating back, but not as low as it was 6 to 9 months ago. I'm assuming the wrestling card market is similar, but I just don't know. For personal example, I bought a Giannis Prism rookie PSA 10, $1,200 close to a year ago. It went all the way up to $7,000, but then retreated back to $3,500. I'm okay with that. At the end of the day, I'm long-term on most everything I buy, but I don't want to be into something more than what it's really worth. A great question. Thanks for sending that in, man. Really appreciate your time and appreciate you giving me some material to make a video on, so thanks. I've touched on this in previous videos. I'm very, very bullish about legends in professional wrestling. Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Steve Austin, Andre the Giant, those types of names, Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, you get the picture. Those guys are solid investments, in my opinion, especially if you're going back and buying the vintage stuff. Again, for context of vintage in wrestling cards, we're talking 2002 and backwards. So if you're picking up legends, over-the-top stars in that realm, I think it's a very, very safe place to put your money. Especially if you're long term, because I don't think, you mentioned this rock card. I don't think you could buy that rock card and necessarily flip it tomorrow and make $1,000 if that was your goal. It could happen, especially with the market we're in, but I look at vintage wrestling as something you want to hang on to, keep forever because it's awesome, and then if you decide you want to sell it 10 years down the road, I think you'd make a pretty good profit. I mean, look at some of these cards, what they're selling for now, and what they were selling for 10 years ago. That should explain everything you need to know right there. He also had a great follow-up question and a comparison question that kind of will bridge the gap between sports cards and wrestling cards, and I want to touch on that right now. Would you trade a Kobe base Topps Chrome rookie card, BGS 9.5, with 3 9.5s and a 9 sub for a PSA 9 Dwayne Johnson Bumblebee? Wow, we're talking 2 heavy hitter cards, no pulling punches with these two. So let's jump into some of the recent sales numbers that I've seen on both of these cards and break down the comparisons. So recent sales of the Kobe Topps Chrome rookie card in BGS 9, there were several sold. They are all over the place, very plentiful, different grades. But looking at 9.5, I found some for 7K, 8.5K, 6K. Most of them are falling in between the 5 and 5.5K per card on the 9.5 as of the time of this recording. Meanwhile, looking at the Dwayne Johnson Bumblebee card in a BGS 9, because that's what I could find. I couldn't find any 9.5s at the time of this recording. They were selling for around $2,500 to $3K a piece. There was one that sold for around 8 or 9, and then another one for like 12 or 13. I think both of those may have been Probstein auctions, so you can look into that how you will. But that's just an interesting comparison of the sales numbers between the Dwayne Johnson Bumblebee card and the Kobe Bryant Legendary Topps Chrome rookie card. So here's my take overall on these comparisons. Kobe card's legendary no matter what grade you get it in. it's going to live on forever, only go up in value. The thing with the Kobe card is it's a lot more liquid. When you go on eBay and you look at the ones that are available and the ones sold, again, in any grade, you're going to find a lot of them on there, available at all times. So if there was ever a situation you had this card and you needed the cash real quick, you should be able to sell this Kobe card relatively quickly. In contrast, you have the Dwayne Johnson Bumblebee card. It's a little bit harder to find. You don't see as many of those available, regardless of the grade. Speaking of grading, I think they're probably a little bit harder to grade because they're perforated magazine cards. So that's an aspect. I'm very high on The Rock going forward. I think he's kind of transcended wrestling. I mean, most of the time we're looking at wrestling cards. Here we're looking at a football card, clearly. Anything this guy touches, even some of the Scorpion King cards, especially the on-card auto that I've seen floating around with him in it, I just think the Rock cards have a lot of growth potential. And kind of comparing the two, Kobe and The Rock both are transcendent worldwide stars, whether they're pop culture icons, sports, movies, entertainment, you name it, these guys are involved. But, major difference in the market for now. Kobe market is huge. Again, both guys are worldwide, but I think if you kind of put the two cards together, more people are going to gravitate towards that Kobe card as opposed to The Rock. Wrestling cards, in general, even though both of these guys are transcendent stars, wrestling cards, characters, or in this case, Dwayne Johnson, a football card, I know, a little confusing, but you know what I'm talking about. I don't think there's quite as big a market as there is for a top 3 sports franchise worldwide. So just food for thought on those two. You know, if you want more of a liquid card, more of a mainstream card, I think the Kobe's the option. If you're looking for a harder to find kind of grail style card, Dwayne Johnson card. But ultimately it ends up being, who do you like more? You like Kobe more? You like The Rock more? Buy who you like more and buy what you feel more comfortable with putting your money in for the long term. The next question was just a tweet in general, not directly to me, just tweet in general from WrestlingTradingCards.com. Go check them out on Twitter. Make sure to follow their account. And great YouTube channel doing some interesting stuff with old sets of cards. Recently did some box breaks of Undisputed. Go check them out on YouTube. Subscribe to their channel. But here's what they put out there for the community to answer. If you're a new collector of wrestling cards or getting back into collecting again after a long layoff, what would you recommend someone start with when getting back into the hobby? This is a very easy answer for me, and that would be the 1985 OPC and Topps and 1987 Topps. Very easy sets to get into. The reason why I recommend these is they're both Topps products, so they're legit. Everybody knows Topps, so you can transition easy from the sports world into that, or the non-sports world if you're into like Star Wars or something. Topps products, easy to learn, easy to get into. The other thing is all the big names that you want to know of are in these sets. In the 85 set, you've got the 2 Hogan rookies, which, again, it's a debate on the rookie cards. I did a whole video on rookie cards. You can go check that out there if you're interested in learning more about wrestling rookie cards and how complicated it is. So you've got those 2 cards. You've got the Roddy Piper rookie. You've got British Bulldogs rookies. But then even in the 87 set, you've got the historic Andre card, which is technically his first Topps WWF card. He had some stickers in the 85, which there's another reason to go buy the 85, is the cool stickers. But you've got the Bret Hart rookie, and just really cool looking cards on that 87 set. So both of those are a great place to start. They're also affordable. Well, at the time of this recording, you guys know how the card market is. You can pick up these complete sets for $50 to $100 on average, anywhere in between there, sometimes 50, sometimes 100, sometimes more. Sometimes people will throw in bonuses when you're looking at these complete sets. But that's really affordable for a complete set of cards with iconic cards in them. As I mentioned, I also failed to mention a minute ago, Macho Man rookies in the 85 set. That's a huge chase card for people right now. Even the off-centered ones, bad condition, people are buying these up, and I'd recommend you do the same. So I think the 85 Topps and OPC and the 87 Topps, great place to start. If you're just coming into wrestling, you're going to have a lot of fun with these 2 sets. And then if you find out that, hey, I really dig these wrestling card things, then you can branch out. But good place to get your feet wet, good place to keep something liquid on hand. You could sell these very easily. They transact quite a bit on eBay. They're always available. So great place to start. Next topic is an Instagram post from Brett McGrath of Stacking Slabs. If you're not already, go check him out on Instagram and go check out the awesome podcast he's put together, Stacking Slabs. Hope to be on it one of these days, but until then, there's plenty of good content and great guests on that show. So, here is his post. Wrestling cards are what brought me back into the hobby. This week has been my biggest week all year on the wrestling card front. So many deals. Can't wait to share more about it this week. Always follow your passion. It will take you awesome places. Hashtag the hobby with Charlotte Flair sticker. First off, I want to thank Brett for being such a cool, easygoing guy, easy to reach out. We talk a lot in DMs about wrestling cards mainly, some other sports cards, but mainly wrestling. Brett gets it. Wrestling is pop culture. It's nice to see someone like Brett, who has a pretty good-sized platform, be able to talk about wrestling and not even care. To be honest, I think deep down inside, a lot of people grew up watching wrestling. They loved wrestling as a kid, or maybe they still like wrestling and they just don't want to admit it. I think a lot of people think wrestling is below them. It's nerdy. It's for people who live in their mom's basement, out of shape, lazy, no job, whatever. That's just kind of the lowbrow entertainment aspect, I guess, that pro wrestling gets a lot of times. But let's face it, similar to the NBA, pro wrestling in general is a worldwide form of entertainment. You don't have to know the language. You don't have to know the characters. You see two guys battling it out in the ring, no matter what kind of match it is, people are probably going to watch, just like UFC. Again, MMA, worldwide form of entertainment. Maybe not as looked down upon now. It used to be like in 95, human cockfighting, which I love the old UFC stuff, but parallels between that and wrestling also. People just, I don't know. Pro wrestling gets disrespected. I'm going to continue to buy and invest in wrestling cards, and I'm going to love wrestling forever. I am more of a fan of vintage wrestling cards and vintage stars, because that's what I grew up with, but I think wrestling also kind of changed over time. That's another topic for another show. But as far as the wrestling card front goes and the popularity of it, I really think it's only going to take like one major influencer. Gary Vee's talked about it a little bit, but I think there's going to need to be something to kind of push one of these cards into the forefront on the value perspective, or a big box break or something, similar to what we saw recently with Logan Paul and the huge Pokemon break, which, speaking of Pokemon, let's jump into the next topic. So this next one's a tweet from Kyle from the Wax Museum podcast. If you're a fan of basketball cards and you're not following him and listening to his show already, go check it out. Go subscribe to his podcast and follow him on social platforms. Now let's look at the tweet that he put out. Just a general observation. We're seeing similar victory lap posts from Pokemon collectors that we got from some soccer collectors, vintage NBA collectors, NBA bubble prospectors, Last Dance prospectors, and Project 2020 purchasers. This is not any sort of a prediction tweet either. Kyle's 100% right on this. It's almost as like overnight we all of a sudden had a world of Pokemon collectors and investors. It's like they saw a major influencer making money and showing off something that's not a Luca-based prism or a Giannis-based prism 10, blah, 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 that we always hear everywhere and see all on social media. Those are cool cards. We understand they're valuable, but it just gets so old seeing the same old stuff. That being said, I've been preaching Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, any kind of collectibles. I've been preaching to buy and sell that stuff forever now. There's so many aspects of collectibles that has been unexplored, really, including wrestling cards, which we're still kind of in the infancy of those growing. But Kyle's also right with the Project 2020 resellers and the soccer card things. I saw people buying all of these things at peak value. Not even a fan of the sport, which that's fine. You know, I buy things that I'm not as into, but I'm definitely not buying them at the peak when they're popular. I'm buying them when I can get them for pennies on the dollar. These guys are buying them at their peak value, and then all of a sudden, if the market dips, they're kind of stuck holding these products that they really don't want anything to do with, that they were just trying to make money on, and now all of a sudden, what do they do with them? And a lot of times that ends up meaning they either get themselves into financial problems or they're out of the hobby real quick. He also stated vintage basketball on this. I have to disagree just slightly on this one. Just the vintage market as a whole across all platforms, sports, non-sports, big three sports, you know, you get the picture. It's kind of been a slowly growing segment of the market in general. Even before the big boom during our pandemic happened, you started seeing a lot of people shifting from the modern stuff to vintage. I think that's just going to be a growing segment. A lot of people don't like to get into these risky rookie cards, paying thousands and thousands of dollars for somebody who may not pan out in a year from now. It's still going to exist, and it's gambling of a way, and it's fun, and you're going to get the most gains off that. But I think this year has also taught a lot of people to start looking at kind of safer bets when they're looking at sports cards. With all that being said, I really do think this Pokemon explosion has some true Pokemon fans. I believe there's two reasons that people have kind of jumped back into Pokemon. Obviously, the Logan Paul thing, it's all over the place. Gary Vee's been talking about it. Pokemon's been a going thing in the hobby for a while, whether you know it or not. But I think a large platform, the Logan Paul box break, that got people talking. And people are like, oh yeah, I used to play Pokemon. I'd like to get back into that. So like a fun, nostalgic opportunity ripping packs, because you can still find Pokemon packs. You can't find packs of other things. You can find Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff like that. But then the other thing, and this is kind of the more important thing, and I want to stress this to any collectible, whether you're baseball, basketball, football, wrestling, MMA, action figures, no matter what you're doing. I think finally people are looking at this as, well, the mainstream is accepting my hobby that I used to be into, or that I'm currently into, and I kind of just, keep it on the back burner because I'm embarrassed. I don't want anyone to know I'm into Pokemon. Guys, you're into what you're into. It's awesome, and that is the one positive out of this whole Pokemon explosion, is I'm hoping that it lets people realize no matter what you're into, just have fun doing it. Who cares what anyone else thinks? Have fun. Next question is from Pop Culture Wrestling on Twitter, and you can go check them out. Just search Pop Culture Wrestling. And their question was, who's your top 3 favorite ECW wrestlers? Hashtag ECW. Now, most people familiar with ECW know the big names, the Sabus, the Rob Van Dams, the Tommy Dreamers. I'm going to take a little bit of a curveball, although I'm sure that's what you expect by now because you've seen some of the stuff I talk about on this channel. So my first favorite ECW wrestler, Larry Winters. Who's Larry Winters? Larry Winters could be found in the AWA in the mid-'80s and kind of going through territories and independents here and there. He was a stronghold in the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance Northeast promotion. Joel Goodhart was the booker. And then when that kind of went by the wayside, he helped start ECW at Eastern. Yes, Eastern, not Extreme. Eastern Championship Wrestling at the time. Go back and you can check out the history of that. But he was one of the first bookers. He was also a one-time holder of the ECW Tag Team Champions with his partner, Hitman, no, not Bret Hart, Hitman Tony Stetson. He also trained some of the local guys, with the biggest name being the Sandman, from what I've done research on, read, and heard. So that's kind of cool. However, probably the biggest standout for me with Larry Winters is when I first see him on ECW TV. So we're talking 1993, Eastern Championship Wrestling, early TV, shot at bars and little buildings, whatnot, before ECW would take off years later. And this guy was like a transplant from the 80s. Big hair, had these big glasses, just a very kind of boring look. And I'm like, man, this is awesome. Which is completely contrast to a lot of other stuff in ECW and a lot of other things for the time. People are kind of progressive in wrestling. They want to see new gimmicks and kind of more modern things. But I thought this guy was a straight transplant from the 80s, and I absolutely loved it. Interestingly enough, one of my biggest memories of Larry Winters is early ECW TV. I don't even remember who he was fighting. I think it was towards the end of the episode. I'm going to try to get a video clip, put it in this video so you guys can check it out. But I remember him being on the outside of the ring. He's going to throw a kick at a guy. Next thing I know, he misses the kick and slips with his other leg, sliding under the guardrail.
And Larry Winters victorious here in the ECW.
Sometimes wrestling is just funny, and you got to look at stuff like that and just have a great time with it. So Larry Winters, rock and roll. Rest in peace. My second favorite wrestler in ECW, Steve Austin. Yes, Stone Cold Steve Austin. That Steve Austin, the one you're thinking of. He was in ECW for a very short time. When he got fired from WCW, he didn't have anywhere to go, so from what we've heard. So Paul Heyman called him up and said, hey, you want to come on TV and talk about it? So that's exactly what happened. And really, I think this is where the Stone Cold Steve Austin character really started developing. As I've said in previous videos, whether it's in wrestling cards, investing, or just as a wrestling fan in general, I love Steve Austin. Talking all the way back to USWA, Memphis stuff, WCW, stunning Steve Austin, ECW, WWE, of course, just everything. I've always loved Steve Austin, no matter what the gimmick is, no matter what organization he's with. But his time in ECW was probably some of the most entertaining I've ever seen, and that's saying a lot considering what we saw from Stone Cold Steve Austin in the WWE. Steve didn't have that many matches in ECW per se, very short time, but he really stood out on the promos, and he was disgruntled, fired by WCW, so what's he going to do? He's going to make fun of WCW, that's right. And he would do things like make fun of Hulk Hogan.
Oh, you know what, dude? I looked at the greatest heavyweight champion of all time, brother. And I had to say my prayers. I had to take the vitamins. Brother, I had to start training again.
Make fun of Eric Bischoff. Anything that he was disgruntled with the volume turned all the way up. Absolutely loved it. And this is where you started seeing kind of the humble beginnings of what we would later know as Stone Cold Steve Austin. And lastly, my favorite ECW wrestler of all time, New Jack. Very polarizing wrestler. People love him. People hate him. I've never seen a guy like this in my life. Absolutely crazy. Gained a reputation for just rolling to the ring with a garbage can full of weapons, tossing that garbage can in there and just beating people up. He really did know how to wrestle. If you go back and look at some of the Smoky Mountain stuff, he had a good feud with Rock and Roll Express. Yes, that's right. Can you imagine the Gangstas working with Rock and Roll Express? It really worked. It was an awesome feud. So his time in Smoky Mountain's cool, but most people know him from ECW and then later on as he would get into XPW and other promotions. But there's just something about this guy coming to the ring. He doesn't even care about wrestling. He just wants to whoop up on people with his weapons. Natural Born Killers from Ice Cube and Dr. Dre just blaring through the arena during the whole time of the match. It's like you're watching an action movie or an actual crime scene, which is what a lot of these matches turned into, I think. But by far, New Jack, my favorite ECW wrestler of all time. I wish New Jack had more cards. We'll do a whole video on his cards later on, but there's just not a lot out there, and what there is out there, they're really hard to find. So New Jack's my favorite ECW wrestler. And lastly, I want to comment a couple of things from David Peck on social media. He had a tweet and a Facebook comment that I wanted to talk about. If you're not following David, go check him out on Twitter and on Instagram. He's like the godfather of the 82-83 Wrestling All-Stars cards, as well as having a nice Mike Tyson collection. But let's look at a couple of things that he posted that I want to talk about. This is the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle or the 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan of wrestling cards. Guys, he's right. That's about as easy as it is to put. I talk about a lot of people coming into wrestling cards from sports cards and how it's kind of hard to navigate the waters sometimes. There's a lot in wrestling cards as opposed to sports cards. I mean, there is a lot in sports cards too, but we've got different sets, different rookie cards, yada, yada, yada. This is the easiest way to put it. So I would say if you want to come into wrestling cards and you're looking to put big money down, this is the card to do it. Now, if you're coming into wrestling cards and you just want to have some fun, you don't really want to spend thousands of dollars on something, then, go back and, like I said earlier in the video, that 85, 87 Topps series is where you can start. But this is like the mantle of wrestling cards, brother. And this next comment was him replying to someone on Facebook that I saw, and it's just a general question about wrestling as a whole. Do you think it will ever get back to the level? And I'm assuming he's talking about like Attitude Era or the 80s golden age of wrestling. I think the only way is with a really special talent or two and a hell of a roster, great booker. Honestly, I don't think you can find any of those in today's wrestling. And David replied, I doubt it. Fans are too woke. Internet has really ruined wrestling in many ways. Wrestling was must-see TV. It was so fun. Gotta agree with David again on this one, unfortunately. I just don't see wrestling ever returning to where it was. But it's probably not for what you think. I honestly think that it's because of entertainment options. Back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have all the free entertainment options that the internet provides us, as well as other opportunities to do things, currently as opposed to back then. I think there's more money in wrestling right now, fewer fans, more passionate fans. I think they're having some of the best athletes ever. There are so many wrestlers now that athletically are better looking, muscular, can do better things. And we've got, of course, women's wrestling that's become huge. All of that stuff is way better than it used to be in the 80s and part of the 90s. But again, we just have too many internet options. People want to spend time on TikTok all day. They don't want to watch wrestling. And I also have some very strong opinions on wrestling in general and why I kind of don't think they're keeping the attention of some people. But we'll save that again for another show. And if you like this video and you like some of my other videos, make sure you click the video on the screen right now so you can find out more information about wrestling cards and wrestling in general. And I'll see you in the comments.